Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in Waynesville, North Carolina. And today is Wednesday, March 20th, 2019. And later today we will have the vernal equinox, the official ingress of the sun into Aries, beginning the tropical year, kind of an astrological new year, if you will. And this is a really interesting time in many ways because for a very long time this has been used as a sort of foundational chart to forecast for the year. This, as I understand it, this became in vogue particularly in the Persian era of classical astrology. So as you may know, like astrology originated in Mesopotamia and Egypt, and then it came to Greece, and it had its foundations as a tropical system there in Greece, and then Europe went through what became known as the Dark Ages. But at that time, the Persian world was having a golden age, and so it's very interesting that it's during the Persian era that this particular technique came into prominence because it's based on the sun, the movement of the sun into cardinal signs. And this was during an era where the Muslim empire was having a golden age and this flowering, a renaissance of their own, preceding really the European Renaissance, where many of the foundational texts of the Hellenistic era would be translated from Arabic back into Latin. So it's kind of fascinating how astrology has been passed down and through all these cultural lenses. I'm going to share my screen here with you. So, by the way, those of you who are listening in just via the audio, if you want to see the visuals for this podcast, I'm going to share those in video form on YouTube. So you can just search Gary P Caton there on YouTube, and you'll see all the visuals that I'm referencing here. So this is the chart for the moment of the sun's entrance to Aries later today over Washington, D.C. And of course, as a mundane or world astrology tool, you would cast this chart for the capital of the country or region within where you live. If you wanted to cast it for your local residents to put it on more personal terms, I don't see a problem with that. But since I'm doing this for as wide an audience as possible, I went ahead and cast it for DC. And you can see at that time, the sun is about to set. It's not far from sunset. We have Virgo rising here, Gemini on the midheaven, and the ruler of both of those signs is Mercury, who is retrograde under the beams of the sun and conjunct Neptune. So this is a very interesting state of affairs going on here. And to really understand what this means, we should put this in context, because this is an unusual situation to have Neptune right on an angle like this. But within the recent history, it's not unusual at all. Over the last 2 years, 6 out of 8 of the previous 8 ingress charts have had Neptune on an angle. It's really kind of freaky. So if we go back here a couple years, and we look at the chart for the ingress of the sun into Aries, okay, in 2017, you see here's Neptune on the ascendant. All right. So this is, of course, you know, the run up to primary season and all that with the 2018 election. And you see now, one of the things that is recommended is when you see a cardinal sign on the ascendant, this chart would be good for about only 3 months. You would cast all 4 ingress charts into cardinal signs for that year. When it's a mutable sign, and that's because cardinal signs are very active and initiatory, that their effects don't last as long, but they're more initially forceful. Fixed sign would mean that the chart is good for the entire year, because fixed signs do just that. They fix things into place. And then the mutable signs, being double-bodied, their effects were seen to last for 6 months, so you would need to cast both charts for that year. But it's interesting because if we just go and do all 4, which some people like to do that anyways, regardless of the sign on the ascendant, we'll see that again at the Cancer ingress we have Neptune rising. And then if we do it again for Libra, which would be the second important chart for the year, for 2017. Now we don't see Neptune on an angle in this chart. Neptune is down here. But if we go and do the next ingress for Capricorn, there's Neptune again on the ascendant. So 3 of the 4 ingress charts for 2017 had Neptune on an angle, and I mean this is incredible to me. And I should have said, you know, I think I misspoke earlier when I was talking about this year being the run up to the election. It was the year following the election. And so there was this whole hullabaloo about, you know, Russian interference, so on and so forth. And it's really interesting because, you know, if you look like a really basic article, if you want to see a really basic article on how to use these charts, one of my favorite sites on the web in general for astrology is SkyScript. It's Deborah Holding's recent Regulus Award winning astrologer. Her site is really good. And if you look here at this article she's got on here, and she, you know, just look at, sorry about that.
Call from.
If you just look at what
5875.
what's mentioned there about Neptune, socialism, communism, left-wing political ideas in general, because it's a collective, it's moist, right? Bring, you know, mobs, secret plots, sedition, fraud, and swindling, illicit undertakings, bogus companies, yada, yada, yada. Sound familiar, right? So the entire year of 2017 had kind of this cloud of Neptune hanging over it, right? And as if that weren't enough, let's take a look at the charts for 2018, right? So let's go forward. Look at the next Aries Ingress in 2018. For 2018, the situation changes a little bit. We don't see Neptune on the ascendant, but there it is on the midheaven. And then if we run the next ingress chart, which we need to do here because we have a cardinal sign rising, right? By the old school rules. So we run the cardinal, the next cardinal ingress. Lo and behold, there's Neptune again on the midheaven. And then again this year, as in the previous year, it skips the Libra ingress. So with the Libra ingress, we don't see Neptune on an angle, though it's in the 10th whole sign. And then if we go to the final ingress of the year for Capricorn, once again, we see Neptune on the midheaven. Now, what does the midheaven represent in the mundane chart but the president? So, once again, for the entire year, we've got this Mueller investigation. We've got this cloud of Neptunian stuff hanging over everything. And, it significantly affected the sort of situation from the midterm elections, right? Because there was a change of power in the House of Representatives and so forth. So there's this kind of weird Neptunian cloud hanging over the entire socio-political climate for like 2 years now. And then what happens when you figure like 6 out of 8 ingress charts, like that's impossible, like impossibly crazy. And then the next thing you know, you figure, yeah, okay, so it's got to be over now, right? Supposedly Mueller's investigation is coming to an end and all that. And, we're finally going to get out from underneath this cloud. And then you run the chart for 2018 or 2019, and, here's Neptune. 2017, it was on the ascendant. 2018, it was on the midheaven, and now it shows up on the descendant. I mean, it's literally traveled like across the charts in primary motion, right? Rising, culminating, and setting. I mean, it's just unbelievable how this planet keeps showing up. But in an interesting twist, this time the ruler of both of the angles in the chart, Mercury, is conjunct Neptune, and it's retrograde. So this definitely symbolizes some kind of reversal of the general situation for the last 2 years. So we still have the Neptunian cloud hanging around. I mean, think about it. If you've got a 2-year-long Neptunian cloud, that thing's not going to clear in like 5 seconds, right? But it does suggest that there will be some change in direction, and then if we look at the chart for the next ingress, right? Because we have a mutable sign rising here, so we would look at the Libra ingress next. We can see that Neptune's not on an angle. So within the next 6 months, we should see some clearing of this Neptunian cloud. But until then, we're still navigating through this Neptunian illusory realm, fake news and all this stuff that we've been through over the past couple years. So that's kind of like the initial thing that we see when we look at this chart. And by the way, in addition to this article here on SkyScript, I wanted to show y'all some good links. I saw this other interesting commentary on this technique from this website, 7 Stars Astrology, where they're talking in particular about Abu Masar. And Abu Masar was particularly interested in the great cycle of Jupiter-Saturn and tracking how it changed through the elements. And so he applied this technique in concert with that, so that he thought that when the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions entered Aries, that the Aries Ingress chart for that year, right? Not the chart of the conjunction itself, you see, but the chart of the Aries Ingress for the year that the conjunction happened in Aries, right? This is something I learned way back in the day. I started working with these charts back in like 2003, I think. I published an article. If you go to my website here, dreamastrologer.com, and you look on the articles page, yeah, I published an article about Saturn's perihelion back in 2003 in the Mountain Astrologer. And I was talking about using these ingress charts to like see if invading Iraq was a good idea. And surprise, surprise, not so much. And then I was talking to Ken Gilman, who publishes this or used to publish this magazine called Considerations for many years. And he was explaining to me how, yeah, you have to cast the ingress chart for the conjunction, not the chart of the conjunction itself. And so I ended up collaborating with him and resulted. By the way, you can click on that link and find all the old issues of Considerations here. And then if you click on that was the final issue of that magazine that I published this in, because I was trying to look at this idea that the previous great conjunction of back in the Middle Ages of when we had the Black Plague, right? I was trying to compare that to the charts for now and see if this idea of some avian flu pandemic was, backed up by the astrology. So it was an interesting little exercise there that you can find in those articles. Ken's got one of my favorite astrological articles of all time is in the first issue of that Considerations. It's just about the time of Samhain in the fall cross quarter. Ken wrote, I think it's in the very first issue of Considerations. There's a wonderful, wonderful magazine, so you should check out those as well. But to get back to this chart, as I said, you said it for the capital city, and then you read it like you would any other chart, but generally speaking for, socio-political kinds of things. Now, that said, I think you can also read these for we're all immersed in kind of a socio-political soup. I mean, you kind of can't get away from it. So I think it's interesting to look at these also just in those terms of like not necessarily trying to predict, what will happen. Although I certainly do that. I mean, earlier this year, I predicted that that because Mercury was making an appearance into the evening sky in Pisces and conjunct Neptune. Now, remember what we said before, Neptune equals left wing, and the most left wing of all politicians right now is Bernie Sanders, right? Because he's actually a democratic socialist. So I said, I think Bernie Sanders is going to get in the race this week because Neptune's making an appearance. Mercury's making an appearance, conjunct Neptune. Sure enough, Sanders jumped in the race. A lot of people weren't necessarily happy about that because, identity politics and whatnot. But I just thought it was really interesting. So it's not so much that I'm not interested in predicting or interested in politics. I'm not really as interested in politics as I am people. And so I want to try to read this chart a little bit from the perspective of how does all this socio-political stuff create a climate for regular people. And right away, you know, we notice that the sun ingressing Aries is happening alongside a couple other really important ingresses that have happened. Chiron recently went into Aries for the second and final time. And this is really like, this is actually the first ingress of Chiron into Aries since its discovery. The last time that Chiron went into Aries, we didn't even know it existed. Yeah. And that was a very volatile time. I wrote an article about this recently, by the way, and if anybody wants to sign up for my newsletter, go to my website and sign up for my newsletter. I'm going to be releasing that to the general public pretty soon. My subscribers have had access to it for a while, my premium members. But if you go ahead and sign up for my newsletter, I'm going to be sending that out pretty soon, and I'm going to be looking at the ingress of Uranus into Taurus as well. But this ingress of the sun into Aries is happening at the same time that Chiron has recently entered that sign, right? So that's like a pretty big deal. And, you know, one of the problems I have with astrology, pop astrology, is that it can be kind of oversimplistic. And you know, you get this, you know, so two words you often hear with Chiron, for instance, is wounded healer. Well, what about just like Renaissance person or medicine person? Or because what happens after you heal the wound? You see, like I don't necessarily appreciate all this focus on the wound, because you know you're assuming people are wounded or need to be treated as wounded, and it's kind of like a negative assumption, if you ask me. I mean, I don't necessarily want to focus on that, you know. And I don't feel like I'm really in that place personally. So what happens when the Chiron archetype has done enough healing to begin to share its medicine with the world? And I think that perhaps that's where we're at, because this is the first ingress of Chiron into Aries since its discovery. So there's kind of like a new beginning for the Chiron archetype. And I think, again, I think it's about healing, about medicine of all kinds, and about kind of like being a Renaissance person, right? Because that's really what Chiron was in the mythology. So you've got this exalted sun with Chiron, kind of like really coming into, there's a whole generation of people now who are coming into their power, and they're entering a time in their lives where they have enough experience to really have like a lot of wisdom, and to really be able to like share their gifts in a really full and wise way. And I think that's really exciting. And I'm talking to a lot of people who were born with Chiron and Aries, and seeing that happen. And I think it's really beautiful. So that's kind of the way I see that, you know. Of course, we've got this full moon over here that's about to rise, creating an opposition there. And oppositions are always about tension, and Virgo is definitely about discrimination. So I guess if that's not the place you find yourself, if you still find yourself working with wounds and so on, and still working through healing, I would say like be cognizant of like when is enough, like when are you healed enough? Because I think we can get caught in this loop of, oh, my wound, and oh, and healing. And I mean, I see lots of people who have been doing astrology for a really long time, and they think, you know, they're still coming to me, and I'm like, you can do this. You know, like you've got everything you need. What you need is confidence. What you need is like that Aries, you know, confidence of like, I am who I am. And like, yeah, I had some bumps in the road, and yeah, I had some trauma, but like it made me who I am, and there's gifts that come with that, you know. So yeah, I just I just think that it's important to remember, like, at some point, you're healed enough to just go on and do what you need to do. Um, Another thing interesting to note about this chart, in addition to the Sun and Aries being exalted there, is that all three planets of the diurnal sect, or the diurnal team, if you will, that is Sun, Jupiter, who are diurnal by their nature, and Saturn, who is teamed with the diurnal planets because he's so cold, trying to warm him up a little bit. All three of these planets are in signs of their dignities. Right? Saturn's in Capricorn, it's nocturnal domicile. Jupiter's in Sag, it's diurnal domicile, daytime domicile. So you have all three of the yang planets, if you will, dignified, and this is going to last all the way until April 10th. And so I wrote about that in my article. I was invited by horoscope.com recently to, I'm just going to bring this down for a second and then bring it back up. I was invited by horoscope.com recently to do some writing on the magical transits for the year. And just going to pause this for a second. So let me try this again. Okay, so there we go. Yeah, I was invited by astrology.com to do a series of articles on the most magical transits of 2019, and this is definitely one of them in my mind. You can check that out on their site there. If you go up here to where it says astrology and then check out stellar guidance, there's I've been writing a series of articles for them, and it's been a lot of fun. I'm really happy to be doing some really interesting work with them. That full moon conjunct Regulus, of course, was on the list, and then this thing that I'm calling the Yang crescendo. And then I wrote about that a little bit more in the we're doing it by quarter, so I wrote like a separate article for the spring, and then another one for winter, and then another one for spring. And yeah, it's a really powerful thing to have all three of these planets and their dignities at the same time, you know. So so I mean, think about that. Just make like a sort of cookbook sentence for that. So bold, forceful action, Sun and Aries, forward-looking and expansive enterprises, Jupiter and Sagittarius, and structured approaches toward long-term objectives, right? So all the way up until April 10, when Jupiter turns retrograde, there's the powerful opportunity. And because it's part of this ingress, I think really until the next ingress in Libra, we're going to be feeling the effects of these influences, especially if we go ahead and initiate these activities now. So I wanted to share that with y'all as well. Now, we go back to the chart here for a second. Sorry about the technical difficulties there. If we go back to this ingress chart for a second. Okay, I think I got it now. Third time's a charm, maybe. Okay, so here we go. If we go back to this ingress chart for a moment, one of the other things that is really interesting is that Mars is the most elevated planet in this chart. And it's in a square to Venus, who is in Aquarius. So you've got this fixed square between Venus and Mars. And this is actually the third of 3 squares in this particular cycle. If we look closer at what's been going on since the previous conjunction, we'll see that the previous conjunction was in October of 2017. And then we had the sextile, square, trine, opposition. And then in the sort of waning part of the cycle, if you will, it was moving from opposite Mars back towards the next conjunction. There was a retrograde, right? So Venus repeats the 3 trines with Mars and 3 squares. And this Venus-Mars square happening on the day of the equinox makes it very important. So it's the third of 3 squares. So it's kind of clearing up something that began last September in the last degrees of cardinal signs. So there was something that needed to be finished or cleared up then, right? 29 degrees, and then had to be revisited later in October, and then is being revisited for a third time here in the spring. And this would generally be about, sacred marriage type stuff, masculine, feminine, the marriage between our drive to assert ourselves and go out and achieve excellence, or to drive away that which is not magnetic to us, right? Venus is the function that says, oh, that's beautiful, I want it. And Mars then says, oh, let me go get that. Or Venus says, oh, that's not me at all, and I want it to go away. And Mars says, hey, I'm going to fight you, right? So there's this sort of dialogue between our inner magnetism. Do we feel drawn to something or repelled by it? And if so, then engaging our will to either bring that closer or push it away, right? Now, this is interesting because in terms of what we were talking about earlier, diurnal or primary motion, right? The once daily, all of the stars and planets rise, culminate, and set, right? And then anti-culminate. Whereas, and that's in clockwise motion, whereas zodiacal motion is contrary to that. It's counterclockwise, right? And it's much slower. Even the moon takes a month to go around the zodiac, whereas everything rises, culminates, and sets once per day, right? So in terms of primary motion, it's actually Venus that rises first, even though in this chart Mars is culminating. When Mars was rising, Venus was culminating. So as Mars is coming into the sky, Venus is holding the high ground. And I lectured quite a bit on this back at the first Sky Astrology conference, where I was talking about, I think this represents a kind of, if Mars is rising first, then the Mars function is kind of out in front, and we might just just do it. The Nike slogan, for instance, just do it. And then afterwards, sit back and reflect with, well, was that worth it? Would we do it again? Yeah, it was pretty fun. Or, nah, I think once was enough, right? So we can look at that in terms of what's going on now with Venus rising first. There's this sort of need to figure out, do I feel pulled strongly enough to really go after that? Does it feel worth it to me to call on Mars? Right. I remember when I was first getting taught the art of sales back in the day, you know, the people who were teaching me were more like the first model. They were like, yeah, just do it. Just knock on 100 doors and you'll sell, you know, 5 of these things, right? So knock on 100 doors every day, you'll get your 5 sales, you'll make your money, blah, blah, blah. So I proceeded to do that. And but in the process, you know, I realized, like, you know, I'm pissing off a certain amount of people who would rather me not knock on their door at all, and then other people who, like, politely say, you know, please go away, and so forth. And you know, it's like, it seems like a pretty inefficient way to do this. Like, isn't there a better way? So I started doing my own telemarketing, and I got this thing. It's called a crisscross directory, and it shows you, like, first of all, the neighborhood you're in, like, what are the homes worth? Like, is there even any money here? Like, do these people even have disposable income? Right? And so forth. There's a lot of information that you can use in there. And so then I would pre-qualify the leads just like that. And then I would pre-qualify them further by doing my own telemarketing to get a sense of, like, is there any pull here? Is there any interest? Are they even remotely interested in what I'm selling before I go knocking on their door? So then when I pre-qualified my leads that way, but my ratios went up where I was knocking on 10 doors to get those same 5 sales, literally. And you know, it's interesting because I didn't even know it at the time, but later, you know, in my personal chart, Venus rises before Mars. So that was my own natural approach, was like, hey, like, I'm going to figure out if it's even worth it, because, you know, your biggest expense is gas, right? Driving around to knock on all these doors. So, you know, it costs a lot less to just call somebody on the phone. So I was trying to, you know, get the whittle down to the most valued actions, value laden actions that I could. So, you know, for the next 6 months, that's going to be, you know, there's going to be a tension between that, right? These fixed signs, Mars and Taurus. What am I building? What am I manifesting? Venus and Aquarius. Well, a kind of broad vision, right? A kind of broad humanitarian thing, maybe some kind of, like, group thing. But you know, you need to suss out, like, these any particular of these actions that I might be taking to build that thing that Venus is holding up as the ideal. Like, how much value and how much return am I going to get, likely to get, for that action, and then prioritize accordingly, right? Do your most value laden actions first, and then, you know, and then by the time you get to the bottom of the list of the things, those are probably things you really don't even need to do, right? If you do the most value laden actions first, get those done. If you don't get around to the rest of the list, it's probably okay. See what I'm saying? And this is interesting, especially because, you know, we have Virgo rising in this chart from Washington, D.C., and a Virgo moon just before it goes into Libra and becomes full. And in my process of doing, I mean, I did 2,500 years worth of research on these Mars-Venus cycles to write this huge essay that I did for, I published it in 2 parts in the AYA journal, The Ascendant. And I presented it at the first Sky Astrology conference. And I'm going to talk a lot more in the next video that I put out about that research and what it shows us about historically how this cycle acts very differently in 2 different periods. Briefly, the typical routine is that Venus will make 5 conjunctions with Mars before a conjunction where she is retrograde. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5th one being retrograde. That happens for about 200 years. It's very regular. 3, 4, 5 retrograde. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 retrograde. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's the one. That's what's laid out in Ruperti's classic book, Cycles of Becoming. Right. That's the way he laid it out. But then it kind of falls apart. It gets really wild. You see up here, there's like all these conjunctions. There's no retrogrades, right? And then here in this part of the cycle, there's a retrograde conjunction in 2015, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's not retrograde. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the retrograde shows back up. Now, this happens to be one of the most regular parts of this larger irregular cycle that lasts about 100 years. But if we dial down even further, we'll notice that in 2015, there was a conjunction in Virgo. In 2017, the next conjunction was in Virgo. And in 2019, we'll have the third conjunction in Virgo. There's three conjunctions, consecutive conjunctions between Venus and, oh, that's nice. It just disappeared on me. Anyway, I think you saw that. There's 3 consecutive conjunctions in Virgo. So that the Virgo house of your horoscope, I'm just going to go ahead and come back here. So these 3 conjunctions in Virgo mean that the Virgo house of your horoscope is one that is going to be particularly impacted by this current Venus-Mars square, and particularly activated by this need for a sacred marriage. For a while now, and for a while longer, there's been this intense need for the sacred marriage of opposites between your feminine and masculine nature, your drive to, in alchemy, we call the solar king, right? The red king is like this drive to constantly improve things, to constantly like tweak them, to constantly like be building a better kingdom, you know. And then the queen of soul is like, but look, like nature is really actually pretty perfect, and if we just allow things to be what they are, look how gorgeous that is, right? So there's these really contrasting approaches of loving something, appreciating it, and nurturing it to be what it is naturally, and then trying to like tweak that and improve it and take it the next step, right? Those 2 very different approaches, and when do we do which, and how can we combine those approaches and raise something up to be everything that it naturally is, and then take it even further and make it and further refine it, you see? So there's a really interesting kind of process going on in the sign of Virgo right now for 3 consecutive Venus-Mars cycles. We're in the middle one of those, right? And this third quarter square is kind of reminding us of a need to like let go of some things and to sort of dream into being some new things, right? Because what Rujar said about the third quarter square, I think, is really interesting. He said it's about leaf decay on one hand and seed rebirth on another, right? At the fall equinox, right, you have the leaves falling from the trees, but you also have the acorn, right? And it's like, he's like, you know, which one are you going to focus on? Are you going to focus on the decay? Or are you going to focus on the seed, right? And I think that goes back to what I was saying about Chiron and Aries. Like, we could focus on the wound forever. We could, I mean, there's really, it's like, you know, they talk about in psychotherapy, it's like peeling an onion. There's kind of no end to it, you know. But at some point, it's like, am I missing out on actually going anywhere and getting anything done and living my life by this continual peeling of the onion, you know? Am I healed enough for whatever? So then if you say yes to that question, then the focus is, well, what is that whatever that I'm healed enough for, right? What is the seed that is also falling at the same time as the leaves, and how can I like use these leaves and like maybe rake them up and protect that little seed to get through this next period until the next conjunction when it can come out and be the beginnings of a new cycle and a new way of being. So that's about it for this time. I hope you enjoyed our little forecast here for 2019. I think it's pretty exciting. You know, we've got Chiron going into Aries. We've got Taurus going in. Sorry, Uranus going into Taurus. I didn't really get a chance to talk about that. I'm kind of saving that for another time. Maybe when the sun gets into Taurus, for instance, would be a natural time to talk about that. But we've got all these yang planets in their own domiciles. We've got this really potent, juicy Venus-Mars square to work with, our sacred marriage. You know, I'm pretty excited about it. I think I'm looking forward to creating a lot more magical stuff this year. And I hope that it's been helpful for you as well. By the way, we have a whole membership program that goes, if you're enjoying this material, we have a whole membership program that goes along with this. We're calling it the Hermetic Hive. One of the members of our group, I was saying, you know, oh, we need a name to call this group, and we need an H word, and we came up with Hive, which is kind of cool. But one of the benefits of membership in the group is that, you know, we have a private Facebook group where we can all get together and share charts and ideas and inspiration and so forth. Of course, you get premium materials each month in the form of like reports and videos and various things like that Chiron report, Chiron and Aries report I told you about that they've already had for a while. You can get by signing up for my free newsletter. So check that out. It's a fun, interesting program, and I think there's a ton of value there. Depending on what level you join up, you can also get reduced rates on consults. So if people that I work with frequently, more frequently than just once a year or something, for instance, that's a really good deal. And then if you want the best deal of all, you can get access to my entire archives, like a decade's worth of work and recordings of lectures and videos and reports and all kinds of stuff there in the archives. So check that out. And please also remember to, you know, if you're enjoying the program, to take a minute and give us a review, either on iTunes. You can leave a review on the Facebook page for the podcast now. And of course, if you're reading my book, Hermetic Astrology, the Mercury Elemental Year, which you should be now during Mercury retrograde, because that's what this was designed for, to facilitate that experience, then you can leave a review there on the Amazon page for that. So I appreciate y'all giving back. You know, it's always wonderful to hear feedback from people, and it helps keep me going. You know, I've been doing this for podcasts since 2008, and I haven't succumbed to pod fade yet, and I have no plans on doing so. But at the same time, you know, hearing back from y'all and the feedback and stuff helps keep me going and helps keep me providing this free service to everybody. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you for your feedback, and happy 2019, happy vernal equinox, happy Ostara, and bright blessings until next time.